I want to welcome you all to the session on money, measurement, governance, a relational challenge. Ken Gergen is a senior research professor in psychology at Swarthmore College and the president of Towson Institute. He's internationally known for his contributions to social constructionist theory, technology, and cultural change, and relational theory and practice. His major writings include Realities and Relationships, The Saturated Self, The Relational Being, which I would highly recommend, and his most recent book is Relational Evaluation, Beyond the Tyranny of Tests. Ken Gergen is listed among the 50 most influential living psychologists in the world, and he's received numerous awards for his work, including honorary degrees in both US and Europe. Ken's work in social constructionism is fundamentally reshaped how many of us understand relationships, knowledge, and collaboration. His ideas invite us to move beyond individual minds and instead see meaning as something created between people, in dialogue, in community, and in connection. It's a privilege to recognize his influence and continue these conversations together as we gather here today to reimagine our lives. Welcome, Ken.
I love you, but I can't live up to what she's just said because she's led me into something which I'm not sure I can do. I think so much of you. I really admire everything. But she has set me the task this morning. She said, look, can you come and talk about money, measurement, and government? Now, I don't talk about any of those things. I never wrote papers on any of that, basically. But it was Saliha. So what am I going to do? So I said yes. So I'm going to talk this morning. I've never had given this talk before. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I have to beg your patience. It's not only taking three things out of a hat and saying what's the relationship of them, but I also wanted to make it relevant to this conference. I also wanted to work in something about social construction for some of you who haven't come in that gate, and organize it all in about 40 minutes. So, okay, to simplify this and to make it coherent, this is a story in 5 chapters, okay? Each of them historically significant, bringing us up to the present. And I'm starting with chapter 1, which is called The Glitter of Galileo. Okay? I want to go back in time to Galileo, who was looked at as kind of the center or iconic figure in terms of the Enlightenment. All right? And there are 4 pieces here, centerpieces of the Enlightenment. Here's this single individual using his brain, watching, calculating, measuring, and coming up with a solution, all right, which allows us to do many, many things. All right, so we've got a single individual, a lone individual, who uses thought, who observes, and gives us the keys to progress. So 4 elements: single individual, logic, observation, progress. Now we're already at chapter 2. This is the madness of modernism. So I'm going to bring it up to the 20th century, how these various concepts, how these investments work out in terms of 20th century life. Because by that time, by the 20th century, you've got technology kicking in. That is, science has worked. You've discovered things. Now you've got power, you've got light, you've got conquering of diseases. And you also have factories that can generate huge numbers and output that we can consume at a low cost. Technology, science. So science and technology by the 20th century have given us basically the market in terms of the economy. Now we've got the stock market, which we didn't have a century earlier, at least it didn't count, because there wasn't much capital. People's relationships in the early stages of the United States, in any case, were primarily based on understandings among us. What's fair? What should I give you, you give me? But profit wasn't the major motive. But by the 20th century, because you've got people building up capital with extra money and beginning to compete with each other, the availability of capital becomes your future. And now you've got the stock market with people who depend on you for making progress. Okay, so that's the money part. Now you've got government, and by that time we've got a working democracy where everybody has a vote because every one of us is a small Galileo, if ideally thinking for ourselves, being careful to think and to watch, calculate. So a democracy which doesn't totally work because you've got some competition there already between Republican Democratic Party, which largely, and by the way, everything I say is an overstatement, so just bear with me, largely between management and workers, largely between those who own and those who are working for you. But it works. Now in the center of that is us, people, just the hoi polloi, those who are workers, who are carrying out life in general. So it's these three sort of groups that I'm interested in here always: money, government, public. Now it's interesting because what happens here is because science has been so successful using the ideas of basically coming out of observation, logic, which becomes logical positivism for those of you in philosophy of science, just taking those two ideas and putting them into a philosophy. It says if we can get organized, we can make progress. Because if we use those pillars, we can do everything. I mean, we can organize society and ourselves so we can rid ourselves of the problems. We can all have happy lives. Ergo, now we have social science, sociology, psychology, economics, and so on, to help that happen. All those sciences develop out of a Galilean notion. If we observe, if we think about it, we can do anything. So psychology comes in. Okay, you take care of people's illnesses or problems, those people who are damaged or... So psychology, that's kind of your job, get it organized. Economics, get the economic system organized. And in our institutions, for example, like education, let's set it up so it's well thought out, well planned, like a good factory. We know how the logic works. We know what people need to learn, and we just grind it out in an economic fashion as well as we can. So public education becomes part of the process. Now, there's a way in which we can now introduce measurement, because measurement becomes that vehicle by which we can chart what's wrong, and we know what progress we can make. And it runs through the economy, it runs through the government, and it runs through the public. Measurement. How well are we doing? What do I need to do? Where am I going wrong? How can I get organized to do it better? all the way down to how it is we live privately. How much do I weigh? Are my teeth clean? How much do I smell? How much do I know? Am I better off or worse off than X or Y? We have a ton of measurements for people which come out of this period of 20th century modernism. I remember when I was working on education then, I would get this catalog each year about the measures of education, all the ways you could measure school kids. Everything that they could do, you could be measured. I remember it was graduate school, everything was about measurement. You would take one course in theory, the rest of it was all on methods, and most of that was in measurement, how you measure everything. Personality, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, you could measure it, because that was the key to making progress. You could know how the stock market was doing. You could know whether the GNP was good. Measurement linked it all. But now an interesting thing happens, because what counts as progress here, it's not always clear. What seems to be clear that money is at least a key to well-being, because we can have material things. Remember, material becomes the third part of the Galilean quadruple. That you've got money that allows you actually to bring all the measurements together. Because you can measure not only how the stocks are doing, how your business is doing, how much money you're making, how much money you're making in your organization. You can measure how well the government is doing and know how to make it more efficient. And you can measure what we do every day to know whether what I'm doing, how I'm standing up, is going to really make a difference in how much money I make. Because why else are you doing it? Because money is the key to having more material, having a better life. Right? So that measurement gets pretty wrapped up with money. Both can be counted really precisely. And we can organize the whole system around measurement, which is outcome of which is money, which is equivalent to well-being. Okay? Why else you would want to work? Because I can make more money. Don't like this job, I can make money. I just make enough money. Okay, so that's kind of the madness of modernism. It's everything organized, everything measured around money, get it straight. Another brick in the wall. Chapter 3. This is the postmodern putsch. Many people suffered under those kinds of circumstances. You could look at the generation of a counterculture, the first counterculture, as a response to that. That is, we don't want to be organized. We don't want to go through school systems like this. There is more to life than making money. We don't want to live in houses that are all in rows. We are attacked by all of our capacities for spontaneity, for joy, sexuality, all of that's being robbed and for purposes of organizing around something we don't care about. Major addition. That's also the beginning of social unrest, emergence of Martin Luther King coming out of that, beginning of feminism. You begin to get a culture then resisting what is implied in modernism. And it's out of that ferment, out of that cultural ferment, that what I'll call the postmodern dialogues in the intellectual world arose. That is a resistance to modernism, to the Enlightenment, Now, just a couple of those logics so you can see how that goes. Take material, sort of fundamental, right? The observation of the world. We can get to know the world, we can manipulate it, we can control it, we can create the future. So, what is that? Well, here begins social construction. If you're a realist, you say, okay, it's a plastic bottle of water. If you're a constructionist, and there's a whole lore to this I won't go into, whatever this is will be named out of some kind of paradigm, some kind of background. You and I can call it a bottle of plastic water, or a plastic bottle of water. What would an environmentalist call it? An abomination. What would a physicist call it? What would a biologist call it? What would an art historian call it? Each group would have its own names, its own discourse, its own way of understanding what that was. And outside of a discourse, outside of any paradigm, outside of any group, what is it? You can call it many, many things, but outside of having a history of calling, which is a social history, you haven't got anything to say. All right? So it takes away the whole observation base. We need to know the real world for what it is, but what is it? That's the beginning of constructionism. And whatever you say, it could be otherwise. And if it could be otherwise, there are other things that we could do with this than drink it and sell it. So it's constructionism opens up all the voices of possibility that are not contained by the realist and say, well, it's a bottle of water. But now if you make that move, now you open up a whole set of issues, because my logics for what this is are our reasons, all right? What we call the logics, the rationality is also going to be social. How a biologist or an art historian approaches this, there's going to be logics involved with those particular paradigms or traditions. And if I'm a biologist, I can't step out of biology, the logics. So rationality is not something I have independent of what groups I belong to, how we think within those groups. And now you've got observation sort of challenged, you've got logic challenged, so what about the individual? Because who is that individual outside of everything they can do and say within a group? Not the lone individual anymore, it's a culturated individual. Not private, because privacy is already invaded by culture, already invaded by the groups to which you belong. Material? Oh, progress, that's the final one. Progress is a narrative. Whose story is that? Who's telling that story? Suddenly, all right, the whole idea of narrative now becomes a major issue. By the way, just if you're interested, sort of what I'm calling postmodern dialogues primarily are constructionist. They borrow from literary theory in terms of language as the container, and they borrow from critical theory in terms of asking ourselves, whose story is this? Who gains, who loses when you tell it this way? So you've got those three parts of the dialogue. And at this point, the critical voice begins to pipe in and talking about, well, individualism, wait a minute, why do we celebrate the individual? Why do we celebrate the kind of narcissistic implications of each of us out for ourselves? And this becomes particularly important because what you've done in modernism by equating measurement with money and that with well-being, a kind of way we treat each other. That is, what is your value to me? A logic of kind of cost-benefit. That person's going to take a lot of time. They're going to chew up my time. Time is money. It doesn't benefit me to be in this relationship because all it costs me is it just takes time to be in a deep relationship with all the problems it created, so I'm out of here. It's a whole instrumental way of treating each other, which is all tied back into modernism and back into the Enlightenment. And again, the critique of instrumental relationships. Okay, so that's basically a postmodern dialogue. And by the way, nothing is dead. Modernism is still there. It's in some ways dominant, but it's not hot. It's not like on the ledger. Postmodernism and those dialogues has kind of been integrated into a lot of spaces. A lot of people here are quite familiar with the arguments I've made about the postmodern dialogues. So they're still alive, but things move on. Okay, what am I, chapter 4? A catastrophic configuration. Brings us up to the present. Again, think of technology as behind all this in a sense. By this time, you've got technologies which can involve massive numbers of people in terms of information communication. That we are all communicating by this way. Computers have come in, all the social media have come in. So you've set alive communication everywhere around the world 24/7, which you didn't have in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. All that's happened since then. There's also money to be made by virtue of owning those kind of communications. The technologies have allowed some people to become extremely wealthy. So you know, I got a class of billionaires and now trillionaires. I mean, the people who own virtually all the technologies. Facebook, you've got Tesla, you've got, so economically, things have gone skyrocketing in terms of huge amounts of money involved by people at the top who are in competition with each other. I mean, we're in a very scary place now because the stock market is so high, but all of that really depends on most of it, the competition among who's going to control AI, the next technology. It's not an economy that affects us directly, but indirectly it does. And it also means a few people are going to own a lot of what we do. They're going to control the technologies out of which we live our lives. So that competition is scary because we begin to realize about 20 years ago it's unsustainable. It's not only the fear of what you call techno-feudalism, that there's a few people who are going to run our lives, but it's the fear that the environment is disappearing because you need more and more to keep the profit margins going, to keep these companies in competition with each other. And just the latest example is the power centers you need to keep AI processes going. Chew up the environment. Why not? It's unsustainable. In itself, it will kill us. And slowly, we're beginning to realize that. That's part of the configuration. Now you've got government. Partly because of the technologies, you can reach a lot of people and you can generate antagonisms. So you've got a political party system which is based, again, on competition. And you can mobilize a lot of people, and you can create hatred, and you can heat it up to the point that we have now where it's dysfunctional. Our Congress really doesn't work. And even if a Democratic government was to come in, the pendulum would swing again, and the next Republican government would wipe away everything that was done by the Democrats and so on. So we just go in stasis. We just keep destroying everything that the other one does because it's a competition. It's not for the public good. It's for who's going to win. Now you go to the international relations, where again we've got independent nations. Again, like it's an individualism of an international relationship, and they're all in competition. GNP, who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's going to have power, and because we fear each other, weapons, power, defense. No trust. Again, just like individuals, and we all live in our private worlds, I'm not sure who you are. So a distrust among nations, which means that vast sums of money go into arms. It doesn't go to the people, it goes into arms. So you've got a non-functioning government involved again in a sort of unsustainable world of buildup of weapons and control, which there's no end to that. How many atom bombs do you need until you get the next technology, AI technology, which would make, again, go through a whole another level of attack and defense? It's unsustainable. Now, what about the public? My view is that the very technologies which are behind a lot of what's happening in the economy and the government are splitting the public into increasingly small fragments. There's already when Facebook began and media, social media began, we could find each other, as you have people who are here. You came in, you learned something, and I know, I'd like that. I'd like to be with those people, and here we are. But that's going on everywhere, across the spectrum, people who find each other, locate each other, create a little center of interest, of curiosity, of we who really have some good ideas, we who really know how stuff works, we who really see through things, we who know what's really happening in government, we who know who's really evil and right. And so you've got this massive fragmentation into smaller and smaller groups. I mean, even if you look at MAGA, it's shot through with distrust of each other. So it's not a unified group, nor are Democrats unified, but nobody's unified because there isn't any common denominator anymore. Each group looking at it its own way, for its own benefit, for its own raison. And now we begin to see that the groups are breaking down into individual units, sort of an enlightenment dream, because when each can be alone and think for ourselves, not bothered by the group, because the group is dangerous. We have to think for ourselves. This is Immanuel Kant. So now we can live alone. Our technology just allows us to do that. 24/7, I can be entertained, I can be informed, I can be seduced, I can have all that, I can order out for food. I could pretty much live on my own, and because relationships take much time and get in the way, why would I want one? I might, but I can't afford it. And besides, I don't trust those people anyway. I don't trust males, don't trust females. And so I just shudder when I see now the robots that are developing that look like people, talk like people. And that's just right around the corner. You can live with one. I mean, your chatbot is very, very close because it seems like a real person and I can talk with it and it treats me nicely like nobody else treats me. Treats me better than any of my, quote, friends. Why would I not rather spend time with a robot? That's frightening to me. That is in some way an enlightenment dream, but it's a disintegration of all meaning making. So it's a catastrophic situation we're in now. All right, last chapter. Relational imperative. We here, at least within this house group and to some extent others, again, to go back to Sheila and Saliha yesterday, there's this turn to say, look, where enlightenment wants to center on the individual and leaves us all ultimately fragmented, why don't we, again, change the perspective and look at the relationships out of which people come? If we come out of groups in our terms of our logic, let's look at those processes by which we become, by which we develop language and so on, as where we ought to pay our attention. That's the point of attention. I mean, look at this. Go back to language a minute. A word, an utterance, doesn't become a word until there's something that's coordinated, until we agree. I mean, I can call that King Charles. And if you agree with me, let's call it Charlie, King Charlie. If you agree with me, play that language game, and we agree, you can tell me whether Charlie's on the desk or on this table or is on the floor. Okay? Now, if somebody walks in that door and doesn't part of the game, and I say Charlie's on the table, it's going to be like, what? What are you talking about? But realize that until we had agreement, it wasn't anything. Until we coordinated that process of coordination, of movement together of some sort. It's not me and it's not you. It's in that space, I called it yesterday, that between. But, I mean, you can see me talk and him answer, but that's not where meaning lies. My talk alone means nothing. It's just a sound in the room. His answer cut away from my talk means nothing. He's idiotic talking that way. But you put them together and you can't see that. You can see me talk and him talk, but that's absolutely not where it's at. It's that coordination. Him saying that after I say that. And it's unseen. It's not material. You can't measure it exactly because it's not anywhere. But absolutely, without that, we aren't anything. There is no talk, there is no language, which means there is no ontology, there's no way of being in any group, there is no way of valuing anything. There is just a void. So pay attention into that process by which we relate. Not you or me, but the dance. Because without the dance, there aren't any dances. Without the tango as a dance, there aren't any tango dancers. Without the game of tennis, there are no tennis players. Without a process, a dance of debate, there aren't any debaters. Without a process of competition, there are no competitors. Competition is like a dance. It's a form. You do this, I'll do that. You're going to say this, okay, I'll say that. And we learn it from the first time we play a game. Me versus you, who's going to win? And we've learned that dance very well, and now it becomes part of our our lives. Of course we're going to compete as nations. Wealth is good. Of course we're going to compete in the stock market. So to go back to this configuration then, we've got competitions on both sides in terms of money and government, which are unsustainable, and a group like us who are just dangling there. Let me come back to a minute. Trump is not some weird aberrant person who's come out of the woodwork. Trump is in some way a perfect enlightened man. Totally into himself, using his own logics, right? Totally devoted to material, totally devoted to making as much money as he can. Perfect. Now let's go back to the public a minute. Because what's happening to us is we're not relating. We've cut off the possibilities of co-creation slowly. And I was really interested yesterday the way that conversation turned into how do we talk to each other across these barriers, came up time and time again. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to put it. I feel controlled by it. How do we talk with each other? That's a process of relating. And that's what I think most of these people are into that. We work with public, we work with people. We in effect, although our individual efforts may be small, but this group, the public, is our power base, you might say. And everything we do to generate communication that works, that coordinates us across that, is a move to some kind of collective power which can resist both money and government, because social media don't work without us. AI can scarcely work without us. Government can't work without us. I mean, we ultimately can have enormous influence on what those things do, what those processes are like. But it depends on our being able to move together, understand each other, coordinate with each other in order to be able to have expressions which make a difference. Now, look, we're not alone in terms of this emphasis on relationship. I think it's slowly beginning to be realized everywhere. If you look at the term relational, in terms of word frequency, it goes up like this in the last 30 years. And I think partly environment has done it, but other groups are aware of this. So now you've got government experiments with, there's a economic alliance which draws in several countries trying to change the bottom line. So it's a well-being economy. Well, it's not how much money we can make, but if we're going to measure anything, let's look at the well-being of people, how they get along together, how their life feels. Okay, I'll give 2 minutes, okay. You've got other experiments like that, some of them which townspeople are doing. In Scandinavia, for example, relational welfare, where they're trying to take government offices and have them coordinate with people, run them together so that they can deal better with people's needs. So it's not, the government makes the rules and you follow them. It's the government makes the rules with the people about what's reasonable. Now, these are experiments that are going on. Economic experiments. I mean, one would hope that the global tax on billionaires would begin to move in that direction. Donut economy, which is numbers of people into social entrepreneurship, trying to generate communities which are involved in their own welfare. So you've got movements that are coming from all sides. So we're not alone in terms of this particular perspective on relationships. You got the resurgence of Guangxi in China, that is where the relationships are most important. Ubuntu in Africa, again, now over and over, how this is the way to unite people. So I feel there's a convergence here, and it could be a world convergence. Putting relations at the center. Now, there's one last thing about this. What the Enlightenment did in part when it sort of put religion in its place because it was make-believe, it lost all the values behind that, everything that held us together, what was worth living for, why you would care for each other. Right? It was all built into the discourse and dialogue on values, on human values. What is significant? What should we do? Just what goes out the window. After all, science is about what is, not what should be. All that goes out the window. So we lost that whole valuing dialogue, just smattering here and there. But it went out the window because it's subjective. So liberal arts become this small little speck in universities now because they don't make any money. And it's the only area left where people talk about what's meaningful in life. What if, and this could be a universal value, you put the well-being of relationships at the center, how we get on every day. But put that at the very, very center as something we could agree on, a kind of an ethic, a universal ethic of how are we managing together and how is it going? Let us pay attention to that. And it doesn't need a lot of money, but you know very well what it's like when things aren't going well. They're unlivable. How can we generate those processes? And that's what I look at. That's what draws my heart to all these presentations. I mean, you're doing that. You're inventing things. They're just wow, fantastic. All right, so that's 5 chapters. Thank you.
So we spoke about this very briefly yesterday, but I want to ground us quickly in this relationship between the two of us, which is an intergenerational one, and one that's in the room quite a bit. And I really value getting to speak with you and getting to hear from you. And I think one of the things that, has been very present in the news as of late is family alienation. And younger generation severing from the family or saying, you don't matter to me, you have never made me feel like I matter to you. I have this therapy speak that I've learned that means that you haven't shown me your love in the ways that I've needed, and I'm not set up in the world because of that. And you must somehow make amends. While at the same time, the boomer generation is the generation with the wealth. And my generation, the generation below us, have no wealth, have debt, and have to rely on our family yet again to move back home because we can't find a job, to get money from our parents so that we can survive with our families, with our younger people. And I think there's this resentment, there's this competitiveness, right, of you have the governance, right, you have the money, and yet I am supposed to support you with my emotions, with my family, with my lineage. And I guess I'm thinking about point 2, and have we moved on from that? Because that's where the money trail is coming from that industrialization, from the stock market, and that is still how we're orienting in the world, which means that we can't move on yet because we're waiting for you to pass to us to then pass down, and we haven't found a better system yet. So that's just all that's going through my head as you're speaking, is trying to locate this in this moment in time when there is going to be this major wealth transfer in 20 years from within the family system, and how that's affecting us. And I guess my last thought is, Josh Coleman is talking a lot about family alienation. It's 1 in 4 to 1 in 10 Americans are cut off from a family member. Are we highlighting the wrong thing? by talking about the family alienation? Are we highlighting the competitiveness? Are we highlighting this non-relational way of being? And is there an alternative? Yeah, briefly, in 10 words or less.
Well, first of all, I'm drawn to the conflict that you raised. I mean, I hadn't really thought of that, but I don't live in those generations, having no wealth. But it really is interesting, first of all, because wealth becomes a denominator by which we measure love. I mean, already you've got that modernist conflation of monetary with relationships. So you've got that whole background to deal with. And it's also interesting that here is yet another kind of conflict where families are coming apart. It's that whole fragmentation process that it's disturbing to watch that happen and try to work with. Now, let's go back. We don't... Go back to yesterday's talk for a minute, because when you got into the issues about how we're going to get on, and the question raised is, well, I'm not sure how to do this, but maybe we could play, or maybe we could take the opposite stance. And we came up with some ideas. There aren't any, we're not modernists, there are not hard and fast ideas here, but what we do generate, and this is my hope, is resources. If I listen to about play, if I listen about how you can change the conversation, if I listen about how you can do X, Y, Z, hey, that becomes another resource. So that any new situation, like my dad, he has all the money and I'm poor. How do you work with it? I don't know in advance, but in the context, if you've got enough resources of those sorts, be inventive. What would work? Where could I draw from all these things that I've heard and know about? I mean, that's the way I would go with it, because increasingly, and again, technology is going to disrupt everything all the time. So it's a constant disruptor of the coordinations, of that ability to have the resources to move in the next disruption, whatever that is, becomes a significant thing.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm thinking about is the secrecy or the lack of communication around money for so many people, that it's one of those taboo things that's not to be discussed, and yet is one of the, I think, most dominant ways that families structure themselves, or structure themselves within one another and within society, is wealth, because of the capitalist democracy that we live in. And so it just makes me wonder how we can also, because one of the things, Ken, that's so beautiful about how you speak is that you're telling stories, and it's helping us all ground in this vast history of many different ideas that you're bringing together. And it feels like the story of of money and governance and measurement feels so thin in a family often when we're talking about our wealth and resources, and not just money, but what are our other resources as a family? How are we organized in the world? How are we able to connect not only with one another, but connect in these small ways that Saliha is saying in community to build more broadly? And it feels like it gets diluted so quickly when money comes up, because it's different ideas of wealth and resources and a lack of communication about it.
Well, look, the more distance we have, the more likely it is I'm going to raise questions about your motives and who you are, and I'm not sure, and I can evaluate you in a lot of ways, other than I'm a friend and we're having a beer. I'm into this relationship, and I'm not thinking about what you have and I don't have. Okay, so what I'm looking at is fragmentation as raising those possibilities of negative evaluation. Like you're somebody else, I'm not sure, you've got more money and you're not helping me. Now, if you were close to me, I wouldn't ask that question. How much money you have, doesn't matter, Dad.
I wonder with money. I'm going to push back slightly, because I think this is the issue with the family, is there is this closeness and yet this real separation between.
Well, maybe or maybe not. I mean, look, a number of you are doing community work. That to me is really important. That is bringing communities back into some kind of relationship, bringing families back into relationships. Because if that's your friend, You just simply don't do all the evaluations. Okay, oh, it's okay. That's all right. And if I were really close to you, son, I want you to, you want to do that? Oh, I can help you with that. But if you're off there living your own life and you come in and say, Dad, I need $1,000, the only time you come around is when you need $1,000. So it's getting back to something where we're relating in some deep way. The issues will be fewer and further between.
Yeah, I think it's this really interesting moment in history as that is happening because of the economic collapse that families are coming back together. And
Yeah.
I hope that it's an opportunity with the pandemic, with the shutdown and folks not launching necessarily,
I think it could be.
again,
Yeah.
to shift that idea from this individualization that the success is you launching. The success is you going and getting your own apartment and getting your own family and moving across the country, moving across the world to pursue your career, right? Really shifts if it's instead locating it closer to you and I only have so much time left together, so let's spend it together instead of going off and braving a new world.
Yeah.
Great. I want to make sure we have time to hear from everyone else, so opening up for questions. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, here you go.
A quick comment, just the getting closer. I think the getting closer is that kind of playfully, let's call this King Charles. Like, when you said deep, it's kind of an illusion of deepness. You made King Charles together.
Yeah.
And therefore, the closeness is there. Anyway, just.
That's
just
good.
thinking.
That's a really nice comment.
Was everyone able to hear that? Great.
Anyone on this side?
Here, I'm faster.
Okay.
Thank you. I keep thinking about King Charles and this agreement that we made that, that is King Charles. I've been working with ideas of, or trying to dismantle some ideas of patriarchy and oppressive thoughts. And for a moment, I thought that denying that it exists as a way of trying to name it differently would help me working with communities. And I have discovered that it is not as much. So what you make me think with this when I was listening to you is that the agreement has already been made by someone else. And how can we participate in that conversation, trying to make a swift, like a change? Because that agreement, somebody made it on economics, on oppressive ideas, on sexism, racism, classism. How can we start shifting, or no, continue shifting those ideas within that conversation? I've been thinking about this also of Gregory Bateson's going to familiar to novelty, no? So yeah, I'm there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question about when these agreements are made, when isms are created and are acting out around us. What do we do? How do we? Please correct me if I'm not getting the gist of what you're saying. But how do we agitate those systems that are acting out on us? And I'm sorry, tell me your name. Ariana is saying for a time she tried not naming them, right? She tried saying, I'm going to decenter patriarchy and focus on this other thing. And by doing so, I'm going to lift it up. And she still felt the patriarchy acting at her that was taking up too much of her brainwave to not be able to focus on this other thing. So I think her question is really beautiful in that how do we swim in different waters while having to stay afloat in the ocean that we're in?
Well, you know there aren't any real answers to those questions. But having the metaphor is really interesting. And when it comes down to practices, what would that mean in a given situation? It seems to me that, again, to go back, if we have got the resources, we can somehow do better. There's no real sort of, we're not talking about progress here to get it perfect. We're talking about viability. How do I balance off the 4 or 5 people or organizations or commitments or traditions of which I'm a part? You can't. There's no, logic is out the window. It's a matter of how you move within that flow. What's the next move in the conversation? Where does that take us? How do I then move? And there are no real answers, but there are resources. At least that is my hope.
Yeah, Ken, it also makes me think about who do I know, right? If I can't go directly to that, because that, for me, dysregulates, or whatever we're going to call it, right? Like, if that gets me too excited, does my community know another community that might know another community that is able to address that more head-on, and then I can talk with all of us together, and we might be able to have this dialogue that overarches the ism, and instead is about a collective grappling of patriarchy and how does that affect you differently than me, but is also us, and am I acting that out as 2 men stand in front of you and have a discussion about language, and right, to be able to hold that complexity of all of these different voices, but reaching across the neighbor that you know to the neighbor who that person knows, who might have a different perspective about the thing that we've been trying to talk about. Thanks. All right, maybe one more question if we have one. Oh, we're done. That was it. That is the end of our conversation. Ken, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank